What's up? It's Kaylee Cuoco. When it comes to travel, we all have a happy place. I just went to my happy place. I just went to Maui, and it was truly amazing. Priceline has always been about getting you to your happy place for a happy price with deals you really can't find anywhere else. Like up to 60% off select hotels in Costa Rica or 5-star hotels for 2-star prices in Cabo.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Spending some time reconnecting with nature this summer? Here's a camping hack from LL Bean to make your next trip the best yet. Tired of your tent mate's flashlights shining in your eyes in camp? Bring an empty half-gallon milk jug or clear water bottle. Simply strap a headlamp around it, and it becomes a soft white lantern for everyone to see the light. For more camping hacks, visit youtube.com/LLbean. LL Bean. Be an outsider.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. What do your music playlists and podcast feeds have in common? They're a reflection of you. And that's how the State Farm Personal Price Plan works, too. It gives you options to personalize your coverage so you can protect what you care about most at an affordable price that's just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Go to statefarm.com today to create your State Farm Personal Price Plan. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Kick ahead, and Duffy's chasing it. The bounce sets up. The Dragons are steamrolling to week 2 of the finals.
Inside the last 10 seconds of the game, St George, Illawarra to the depth, trying. Brown goes to the air. Going back is Mabon, leaping high and taking it in marvellous fashion with Rod Wishart. He has scored an incredible try and ties this ball game up. Bartram from 18 metres out, he strikes it nicely. St George Illawarra win for the first time in their premiership line. Here's Nathan Blacklock down the sideline, chipping over the top of Joel Kane for a room service bounce to win the game for the Dragons and book himself a New South Wales Blues origin jump.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to episode 183 of the Red V podcast, your undisputed home of everything St George Illawarra. And we're ready to bounce back, aren't we, Dragons fans? We're ready to put ourselves through some more hell with the Dragons, set to battle the West Tigers in the Spoon Bowl or Spoon Battle, it's been called in the media in recent days. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast. We'll also dissect your latest Dragons news, some little bits of information, and we'll obviously recap that team list for both the NRL and NRLW that was named a few hours ago. Of course, our women's side being involved in their first game of the season, so excitement for Jamie Sourwood's women's side there. And also, we'll take a look at the side that Ryan Carr has named. Preview that game against the Tigers, answer your Fans Corner questions, also have a look at the lower grade wrap, and plenty more here on the Red V podcast tonight. And it's a pleasure to have Curtis Woodward with me to guide us through everything in regards to St George Illawarra. Kurt, great to have you on the podcast once more, brother. How are you doing on this Tuesday night?
Good evening, Jack. I'm very happy to be back. Grateful as always. Very interesting game this week. We've kind of had one eye on it the last few weeks. And for me personally, it's a little bit watching your brother go to war with your kind of stepbrother or something. I don't know. It's going to be a weird one, but I'm sure we'll get to that very soon. Interesting this week. It's kind of like a must win for both teams in the sense that, like you were saying off air, Jack, the Dragons have a terrible draw, but, so do the West Tigers. And, I guess they could be playing anyone and it's a bad draw right now. So much riding on this weekend's game. And a little bit worried for the West Tigers, but I'm sure you'll ask us about that a little bit later in the podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting match preview this week with, both the Dragons and Tigers struggling, but obviously Curtin having a bit of inside information about the Tigers season and some of the issues that have plagued them in season 2023, as well as I kind of feel like that scene from The Simpsons where Homer's jumping between the US, the US Department or whatever it is, and like back into Australia. I feel like you got a foot in each camp, Kurt. So it's going to be interesting. Our match preview a little bit later on in the podcast. But let's not waste any more time, folks. Let's jump into your Dragons news and updates for this week. Well, first things first, let's take a look at the side named by the Dragons only a few short hours ago. It was a total of 7 changes, Kurt, from the side that last played. Obviously, Ben Hunt coming back was a big inclusion for the Dragons, but a host of injuries. No Jaden Sullivan, no Jaden Sewer, no Ben Murdoch-Masila. We'll touch on their injuries in just a moment. But the side name, Sloan returns at fullback after he was a late scratching from the game a couple of weeks ago with a calf complaint. Matt Fierney and Michaeli Ravalawa on the wings, Sully and Lomax the centres. Amon gets that number 6 jumper in the absence of Jaden Sullivan. Hunt the halfback and captain. Francis Molo and Blake Laurie are your prop forwards. Jacob Little at hooker. Billy Burns and Dan Russell will get the shot in the second row position. Jack DeBell unlocks a scrum. Moses Mbai 14, Mickey Molo 15, Toby Couchman 16, and Jack Bird, who's played the last couple of weeks in reserve grade. He was pretty solid for the Dragons in their win against the Panthers on Saturday afternoon. He gets a return in jersey 17. With the extended bench, Zane Musgrove currently listed in jersey number 18. Sione Finau 19, Ryan Couchman 20, Max Fierney 21, and Jaden Hunt 22, lining out the extended bench for the Dragons, although I would not think those players would come in. Ryan Carr has not had much of a knack for bringing in players from outside the squad in the lateness towards kickoff. So would say that 17 probably is the side that will take the field on Thursday night against the Tigers. I guess as a Tigers fan, Kurt, what do you make of that Dragons side? Obviously, they don't have a lot of depth to begin with, the Dragons. We spoke about that at the start of the year, the lack of depth they had in the fullback position and also in that edge back row position. And that's probably been exposed with the fact that Billy Burns, who's been underwhelming in first grade, he's been killing it in reserve grade, but hasn't really stepped up to the plate in first grade. And Dan Russell, who's an unknown of sorts, having played reserve grade and just played the one first grade game in the back row. What do you make of the Red V side here for Thursday night's clash?
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. And I guess a little bit of it is necessity with a few guys out, but that would be very close to the Dragons 17 that many would have predicted to start the season. So it's a little bit frustrating for Dragons fans to think, oh, well, we're this deep into the season, we're sitting where we are on the table, and we've still got many of our frontline stars available. And so what's happened to us again in 2023. The difference at the moment for the Dragons is a couple of their outside backs. Lomax is finding a little bit of form. Ravalawa's found his feet a little bit, and Ben Hunt is the big one in number 7. So I don't want to take too much away from the match preview, but I think the big one is Ben Hunt and the fact that a couple of these other guys, even though the bar is so high for them and we expect so much as football fans in general, it's nice to see them actually, trending in the right direction. So I think that's where Dragon's strength is this week, is that if they're going to click, they're going to do it because all these guys know each other back to front. It's whether they can actually do it and don't get, fans on social media frustrated because the bare minimum for the team they've picked this week is that they stay in the contest to give themselves a chance for particularly Ben Hunt to do something late in the game. So all eyes on Ben Hunt, and we'll mention that a little bit later in the podcast too. Yeah,
my opinion is there's not a whole lot the Dragons could have done. Billy Burns has, I guess, passed all the tasks asked of him in reserve grade, and as we said before, the edge back row position for the Dragons has been very thin all season. The only change you could make would perhaps to bring Jack Bird into one of those back row positions, but he's been terrible defensively the last few times we've seen him set up on that left edge back row position, and he's obviously coming back from a knee knock and some knee soreness, so I think Burns and Russell were always going to be in the back row, and I think this is just what we expected. The Dragons fans know nothing is going to be achieved this year. We've got Shane Flanagan coming in next year. He's already improving his backroom staff, wanting to make the Dragons a fitter side. He's got one of his assistant coaches in Dean Young in there. We spoke last week on the podcast about the players that he's trying to sign. There's been rumours of Tino Fasul Malaawi and David Dave Fafita and Luke Thompson and different people. But I think the focus for Dragons fans is well and truly going to be on 2024. Obviously, we're going to cheer on the boys and hope they can get some victories over the next 6 weeks or so. But with the injuries to Sewer, to Sullivan, Murdoch, Masilla, the side was always going to be pretty thin. We'll touch on this later in our Fans Corner question because our mate Jason Dalton Earls has sent us in a question about Zane Musgrove. But I think if nothing else, this probably highlights how far down the pecking order Zane Musgrove is when you're missing Jaden Sewer, you're missing Ben Murdoch Masilla. Admittedly, two players that have been playing on an edge, but I think for Zane Musgrove not to be on the bench, then something has to be amiss at the Dragons. I'm not sure what it is at the moment, but it'll be interesting to see if any Goss does come out of the club during the off season, or if Zane Musgrove if this continues, is he going to ask out of his contract? He's contracted for 2024 with the Dragons, but again, don't want to steal the glory from Jace's question, and we'll touch on that much later on in the podcast. That is the Dragons side named in the NRL. Meanwhile, in the NRLW, the Dragons have named their side the first game of the season, and some huge changes for the Dragons, especially when you look through the off-season when they lost so many of those representative players. And this is the side that has been named to start this weekend. Tegan Berry, who we've seen play on the wing and also play in the centres, will play at fullback. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do at the back. Taylor Mapusia is on one wing and Shania Lendl is the other. Keely Brown is going to be a star, I think. She's a star in the making. She's in the centres alongside Bobby Law. It'd be interesting to see how she plays on the weekend. Tyler Nathan Wong, the 5'8", and Racine McGregor, the half and captain. She's going to be a key player for the Dragons moving forward. Angelia Tiakaranga Katoa is one prop. Tara McGrath-West is the other. She's been part of the Dragons for the last few years and gets a shot up front. As does Renee Target, who was used in the halves and also in a utility role last season. She is in the number 9 role. Sarah Satea, Roxy Murdoch Masilla, and Alexis Teonai she locks the scrum and rounds out the back row. Zali Hopkins, Ella Costa, Jamie Lee Bright, and Madison Weatherall, few of those players that have played lower grades at the Dragons and the Steelers get their opportunities. With Carla Cowan, Sophie Clancy, Cortez Tipua, Margot Vella, and Sarah Reardon on the extended bench there for the Dragons. So a big weekend for both sides. The Dragons obviously win Stadium on Thursday night, while the NRLW side, they'll go up to the M1 to McDonald Jones Stadium in Newcastle to face the Knights on Saturday afternoon in round 1 of the Women's Telstra Premiership. Well, Kurt, our next bit of news in our Dragons news and update section, unfortunately, is the injury news for the Dragons, and they've been well and truly bitten by the injury bug. We would have seen on social media and through the correspondence of the Dragons official page on Twitter and Facebook that Jaden Sullivan and Jaden Sewer are both gone effectively for the season. Jaden Sullivan's injury is 6 weeks. They said that he could return round 26, but I can't see the Dragons bringing him back for one game. That's just not going to happen. Jaden Sewer's had a subluxation of the shoulder. He's going to be getting surgery, so his season is done. And I've got it on good authority from some of the guys I've chatted to close to the club that Ben Murdoch Masilla, who's picked up a nasty knee injury, he was in a knee brace at the reserve grade game on Saturday. His season is effectively done as well. So unfortunate for the Dragons, but again, reinforces what we've spoken about a lot here on the podcast, Kurt, about the fitness levels of the Dragons and the changes that Shane Flanagan's making. And hopefully we see less of these types of things next year, especially when you see those soft tissue injuries that Jaden Sullivan has certainly struggled with for the last couple of years at the Dragons.
Yeah, it's frustrating too. And for the players themselves, like I know they're not having the best season, but when you're down in the trenches with these guys every single day, the worst thing is when your team's struggling is that you can't get out there and help your mates. So I hope they all get better. If it does take longer than it should, then so be it. They need to get fit. And those three guys, a couple of them should be there definitely next year. So fingers crossed they can get better and they come back bigger and better for the Dragons next year.
Yeah, frustrating for the Dragons losing a couple of key players effectively until the end of the season. Moving on. Some exciting news with the Dragons confirming the signing of back rower Finau Latu. He was put pen to paper on a deal with the Dragons that I believe will keep him at the club until the end of 2025. He's a big body. He's had all sorts of success with the New South Wales CHS side, and very, very exciting to get the opportunity to come to the Dragons. I'm sure he's one that is a lot of fans are excited about, and I know the Dragons did a little bit of a piece on him. He's also an Australian schoolboys representative as well, and there's a lot of fans and a lot of people within the club that are really excited about Finau Latu and think that he could really be a star for the future for the Dragons. Elsewhere, as we mentioned, a couple of those Australian schoolboy players picking up honours. Loco Pacific Tonga and Jacob Halangahu, both from the St George Dragons SG Ball side, have also been selected in that Australian schoolboys side. So there is some hope for the Dragons in the future, some exciting young talent coming through, and a couple of them coming through the St George pathways. That is good news for the club as well. And not stopping there, there's also been a couple of selections in the women's under-18 schoolgirl side with Kaylee Talon-Henniker, Evie McGrath and Charlotte Basham joining the side alongside Casey Ree and Indy Bostock. So congratulations to everyone that's been selected there. We've got some really talented players. We've got rich junior areas in both the St George area and also down in the Illawarra, and it's great to see these players' hard work and dedication being credited with selections in these sides. Well, that's all the news we have for you, but let's jump into our This Week in Dragons history as we throw it back to 2013 and also 2003. This day in round 19 of 2013, it was St George Illawarra pipping South by 22 points to 18. And this was just a year before South would win their first premiership for almost 40 years. And the Dragons were kind of down in the doldrums in 2013 as Steve Price had been sacked by this stage. Paul McGregor was the interim coach, and the Dragons, thanks to a Brett Morris try in Golden Point, won by 22 points to 18. Morris scored 2 tries that night. Adam Quinlan scored a try in the 5/8 role. Trent Merrin off the bench scored, and Chase Stanley kicked 3 goals, while for South, Dylan Walker, Adam Reynolds, and Sam Burgess scoring tries. It was an impressive performance by the Dragons to win that one, and that was one of the highlights in what was a pretty barren 2013 side. And then if we jump back even 10 years prior to that, on this very day, it was St George Illawarra getting a win up there at Dairy Farmer Stadium, 300 Smile Stadium. I think it was initially Stockland Stadium, or Willows is the traditional name up there, the old stadium that the Cowboys used to play at up there in Townsville. The Dragons winning by 36 points to 16 in round 19 2003 action. 2 tries to Mark Gasnier, Ben Hornby, Chris Leichfeld, Dean Young, and Brent Kite tries. Mark Riddell kicked 6 goals. Sean Timmins playing 5/8 in that game for the Dragons as well for the Cowboys. Matt Bowen, Paul Bowman, and Matt Singh scoring tries, while Glenn Morrison 2 from 3. 2003, not a great year for the Dragons. Kurt missed the finals and had a lot of injuries, but certainly made some growth with some young players getting some opportunities. The likes of kind of your Brett Furmans, your Dean Youngs, even Luke Bailey was still in the infancy of his career. But when you look on the opposite side of the table, the North Queensland side, this was just prior to them kind of really becoming a competitive side and a champion side, because the following year that they would play finals footy. They famously knocked out the Bulldogs, which in turn actually knocked the Dragons out of the finals when the Dragons lost to Penrith in the old 4th vs 5 semi-final at Penrith Park. They made a grand final in 2005, and obviously 10 years after that, were able to win their inaugural premiership. Do some of these names bring back memories for you in 2003, mate?
Yeah, but look, both sides. For the Dragons, that they were a pretty strong club across the board for many years throughout the 2000s. But if you look at those Cowboys names you just mentioned, guys like Paul Bowman and Matt Singh, the great Graham Murray had gotten up to North Queensland, and everything was starting to move in the right direction for the Cowboys. You look at 2004, they made the prelim final, and from memory, I think there was a very iffy refereeing decision right at the end of the game with the Cowboys in the hunt to knock off the Roosters to make the grand final, which would have been a boil-over for the ages. And then the following year, Jonathan Thurston joins the club and they make their first grand final. So it's so interesting to look back and look at some of these things falling into place, because similarly, if you look at the Dragons as they build towards 2005, that final series, if everyone remembers, everyone thought it was going to be Dragons versus Parramatta all the way through, and then West Tigers and Cowboys came from the heavens to kind of knock those teams out. So Jonathan Thurston, that's arguably, or you could say that's the best signing from an NRL club in the NRL era.
Yeah.
If you think about the chips that were in place for him, that he was the missing piece, and just made them unmissable. Because if you remember, even back in 2003, if you looked at the draw and you had Fox Sports or Foxtel back then, you could probably miss some Cowboys games back in those early 2000s. And
definitely.
Easily, you could kind of skip past that. But good old days there. That was 2003, and obviously some very good names coming through from the Dragons as well.
So we do our Who Am I, where we talk about a former Dragons player, and people tell me whether it was easy or whether it was hard. But let's throw a curveball out to you, Kurt, and see if you can answer this. So at Willows Stadium, so the old 1300 Smile Stadium, there were 4 sides that had a 100% win record. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they won 20 out of 20. There was 2 sides that won both their games up there, and there were 2 other sides that both only won 1. These sides don't exist anymore. So we've got 4 teams, 2 sides that have won 2 games out of 2, and the other 2 both winning their only trip up to Townsville. Kurt, you want to have a stab at it, mate?
Ooh, okay. So the Cowboys came in 95.
Yeah.
So you've got Adelaide Rams played in NRL in 98 as well, so they would have played the Cowboys maybe on 2 trips. So I'll say the Rams.
No.
Steelers?
Yes.
Okay, so Steelers and St. George Dragons as they were?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, you got 2 of the 4.
Ooh. Balmain?
No.
No, I don't know. But come on. Who was it?
So you said Adelaide. Adelaide actually lost both their clashes there. Western Suburbs actually lost both their clashes there as well.
Of course they did.
The 2. So you picked St. George and Illawarra. They both won their 2 clashes there. St. George, the only clash there. Sorry, St. George won 50-14. And Illawarra had won 24-8. But the 2 sides that won both their clashes up there were actually the Western/Perth Reds and the North Sydney Bears. So the Bears obviously were quite good in the mid to late 1990s. So they scored 78 points in their 2 meetings up there, and Perth won their 2 games by the tune of 34-30 in total. So maybe someone got that. If you did, well done. But I thought it'd be kind of good to throw some generic rugby league trivia into there as we looked back in 2003. As the Dragons won 36 points to 16. Now, we do birthdays of former Dragons players each week on the podcast, but I don't know if there's been a bigger week for birthdays if you're an old St. George or St. George Illawarra fan than perhaps this week. So today, when we're recording this, the 18th of July, Tuesday, is the great Scott Goulet's birthday, a wonderful back rower, a try scorer in a grand final, played in 3 grand final appearances for the Dragons. Tomorrow is Mark Gasnier, a premiership winner with the Dragons, one of the greatest centres this joint venture's seen. And then on Thursday, Jamie Ainscough, the former Newcastle and St. George Illawarra outside back that was such an exciting player to watch when he was on. Famously, that story of him having a tooth lodged in his arm when he was over playing in the Super League, but he was a wonderful servant. Also for Western Suburbs as well. I shan't forget that. I was part of those Western Suburbs side in the early 1990s. Gee, we've been spoiled this week, Kurt. Some absolute legends of rugby league that are celebrating some birthdays this week.
Yeah, Jamie Ainscough, that just gave me memories of the tooth in the forehead kind of thing. He probably had some...
Oh, was it the forehead? I thought it was the forearm.
Oh, it could... No, you know what? I think it was the forearm. Yeah, sorry. But I guess he had some medical history to help the bloke out, because he was probably still pulling out Craig Smith's teeth from his arm from 1999. I think even Jamie Ainscough was a Magpies junior as well. Obviously, we've spoken about Scott Goulet at length as well in the past. A great player, obviously a historic name at the club too with his dad. And obviously Mark Gasnier as well. And doesn't Gasnier age? He looks exactly the same.
No, I don't think he does. He's got that Benjamin Button thing going on.
Oh, man. Anyway. Yeah, no, it's, congratulations to all those boys and happy birthday, and have a schooner for the Red V.
Yeah, so Jamie Ainscough actually was a West junior, played for the Macquarie Cobras, in Cartwright in southwest Sydney, and also attended Elderslie High School and played for the Australian Schoolboys in 1989. But an illustrious career, which I feel, Kurt, gets detracted a little bit because of what happened in the 1999 grand final. And obviously he was badly caught out of position, Ainscoe, and tried to save it. And every time you watch it, it looks worse than the time before, but it's just one of those things. But he was a player that had a wonderful career with the Dragons and put them in such a great position. And when you look across his career, including the final 2 seasons of his career, where he went across to Wigan and won the Challenge Cup with them, 267 appearances for 117 tries, so scored 14 in 35 for West at the start of his career. And then with Newcastle between 92 and 96, 47 tries in 87 games, just 8 in 37 for the Dragons, that is St George in 97 and 98, and then 3 seasons, at St George Illawarra, where he had 69 appearances, 25 tries, and then 23 tries and from 39 games in 2002 and 2003. So retired when he was 31, so probably retired even with a few miles left in the tank. Also played for New South Wales, I shouldn't forget, 12 games for them. Played once for Australia in the midst of the Super League war, where the Super League aligned players were not permitted to play for Australia. He played in the 1995 World Cup. He scored a try in his debut, and also played for the City New South Wales side and made 2 appearances there. So a very happy birthday to him, and also to Scotty Gourlay and Mark Gasnier, 3 players that brought us a lot of memories as St George and St George Illawarra fans over the years. I hope the boys enjoy a beer, enjoy a schooner, and can reminisce on the good times they had at our famous club in years gone by. Time for us to almost take a break here on the Red V podcast. We are going to do the Who Am I before that, and the Who Am I is actually someone that was involved in that 2013 game that we mentioned in This Week in Dragons history. So this particular player only played 29 games for the St George Illawarra Dragons, played them in 2 stints, firstly with the Dragons in 2013 and 2014, where he made 25 appearances and scored 8 tries. He then came back for another 4 appearances for the Dragons in 2016. In between that and after that, he played 12 games for St Helens in 2015, and then spent 5 seasons at the Hull Kingston Rovers, where he made 65 appearances and 30 tries. So a total of 106 appearances for 45 tries. He played at fullback, but he can also play in the halves. And he's actually currently the captain coach and playing as fullback / halfback for the Nowra Bomaderry Jets down in the Group 7 competition down on the South Coast. So if that doesn't give you a clue, then I'm sorry. But he was someone that was born in Cogra, came up through the Dragon system, played in the national youth competition, that national under-20s comp in 2012, and then also played for the Illawarra Cutters in reserve grade in 2013, and made his debut at fullback in round 9 of 2013 when the club went down 15-14 to the Gold Coast at a Cbus Super Stadium up there on the Gold Coast. Kurt, have I given you any clues as to who you think it might be this week?
I had a couple of names in mind, and then you said fullback and tries. So first I had Jake Marchetto, then I had Nick Emmett, then I had the Goodwin boys, but now one's playing at Mittagong and the other one is coaching, of course, in the Dragon system. Was he a smaller framed player?
He was.
Played at South as well? Well, South?
No, he didn't play at South. No, the only clubs he played at were the Dragons, St Helens, and then also the Hull Kingston Rovers.
Okay, so I had Justin Hunt. He was a fullback?
So the final clue I will give you before we move on is that he was in the Parramatta system in 2015. So he signed a 1-year contract with them, but he only played for the Wentworthville Magpies in the New South Wales Cup competition. So didn't actually get to play first grade at Parramatta. If that helps you, or it maybe that gives you more questions than answers.
No, straight outside the off stump. I'm going to let that one go through the keeper, and we'll move on.
He also did play in the Cutters New South Wales Cup Premiership winning side in 2016.
Oh, I would have been there too.
Yep. I don't know. Were we commentating that? I think we were commenting. Well, I wasn't on there with you. I think Albie had kind of given one side called the prestigious Sydney Shield game. I wasn't involved in proceedings of the New South Wales Cup, but I think we're all there at the game, weren't we?
Yeah.
At the old Parramatta Stadium, I think.
Yeah, Drew Hutchinson had a big game. No, I've missed it.
Well, you ever think about it? You've probably got another 50 minutes or so, or an hour, depending how much we babble on in our match preview about who it is. But we will give you recap those clues and see if Kurt can get it by the end of the podcast. Time for us to take a break here on episode 183 of the Red V podcast, and then we're going to preview the Spoon Bowl, the Dragons battling the Tigers down there at Wollongong on Thursday night. Big game for both sides this Thursday night. The bottom place West Tigers take on the second from bottom St George Illawarra Dragons down there at Wynn Stadium, a Thursday night game. I imagine it's going to be pretty nippy down there on the south coast in Wollongong. Both sides desperate for competition points, desperate to pull themselves away from the bottom of the ladder. The Tigers obviously staring down the barrel at back-to-back wooden spoons, which no club and no supporter base wants. And the Dragons have had an absolute season from hell and an off-season from hell. The regular season hasn't been much kinder to them, and it's a big game for both sides that have struggled against the other sides in the NRL so far this season. Kurt, it's such an interesting match, isn't it? Because two joint venture clubs, two sides that have struggled, and there's been mismanagement at board level and behind the scenes and in the football management department, in recruitment. We could go on and have a whole podcast about how poor the management's been of both clubs. But I guess to walk away from the negatives, what are some positives? What's something that excites you about this game on Thursday night with the Dragons and the Tigers battling?
Yeah, well, first, just to quickly say, at board level or front office, the West Tigers front office makes the Dragons look like the LA Lakers or Manchester United. So we'll leave that there for now. About the game itself, I think it's exciting because I think both sides will go into the game very confident they can win. I think they'll both be sitting in the sheds before the game, getting really pumped up because this is legitimately 2 premiership points that they can take away from the game. It will be interesting to see which side can hang in there for longer periods because both sides do drop in and out of games. They tend to drift in and out. But I like the pack battle. On paper, if you looked at it on paper and you didn't know anything about the two teams and it was round 1 this year, I would say West Tigers have a better pack on paper and it's based purely on names and what they've done in the game. Several international state of origin players. But the West Tigers are desperately in need of an X factor in the halves. That is truly where they're struggling. From all reports, Ben Hunt had a shocker against the Sharks a few weeks back, but I heard today that he was really, really sick. He was sick as a dog. So I don't know. I think Ben Hunt, if he's got his if he's got his boots with him and he wants to play, I think he'll be the difference between the two sides. I also like Sloan versus Buller.
Yeah.
And Toa and Junior Tupou out wide for West Tigers against Lomax and Ravalawa, who are kind of finding their feet a little bit at the back end of the season as well. So, yes, I think both teams, you can expect them to have some frustrating periods because it's just who they are at the moment and where they're sitting on the table. But I think whatever side can take advantage of those longer periods where they dominate, if it is a 10-minute period, if you can jag 2 or 3 tries out of that period, that might settle the result later in the match.
Just looking back I've tried to go back through the seasons, Kurt, and find a game from seasons gone past where it's been kind of two sides. Yeah, if one side's lost it, that's probably meant that the spoon. And unfortunately, I've come up with your Western Suburbs side of 1999 that they played North Queensland in the second last round of the season and trailed the Cowboys by 3 points. And if they'd won, that could have potentially shedded the wooden spoon, end up losing 36-14 at Campbelltown. And we know the rest is history. So it's a huge game. There's so much coming, there's so much playing on it for both these sides. I like what you mentioned about Lomax and Ravalawa. I think that's going to be a good battle there. Tyrell Sloan, I think it's a chance for us to hopefully see him develop a little bit more. The Tigers obviously have got some talent at the back. I think for mine as a Dragons fan going into this, Kurt, I am worried by the Tigers forward pack. When you look at Isaiah Papali'i and John Bateman, who I think have been really good for the Tigers this year, albeit in beaten sides. I know Bateman came out and the other day, he's chatting to the media, said he's sick and tired of losing, or he's effing sick and tired of losing. But Papali'i had some really bright touches. I'm worried about them, especially with Burns and Russell defending on the edge for the Dragons, and that left edge defensively for us has been fraught with danger for most of the season. I know you speak about the lack of creativity in the halves, but I think this is a game that's going to be won in the forward pack. And when you look at even Alex Twal and David Klemmer and Api Coruscant, I think it's kind of funny because I feel like the Dragons probably outmatch the Tigers when it comes to the back. I know Buller's an incredible talent, but with Lomax and Ravalawa and Hunt and even Amon had some bright touches a few weeks ago against the Raiders. But I feel like once it gets into the forwards, when you speak of Bateman, when you speak of Papali'i, when you speak of Klemmer, Coruscant, Twal, I think Seyfarth's been good for you guys the last couple of weeks. It's quite funny, but I am worried by the Tigers forward pack because I think they're the kind of pack that could roll over. And if there's space and time for whether Dane Laurie does line up in that number 6 jumper or whether he's a late scratching, Brandon Wakeham, even Jahream Buller getting involved in some playmaking ideas and chances late in each half. I think that the forwards, if they can give those guys space, I think playmakers can improve 1,000% if they've got a bit of room in front of them. And I imagine that's what the Tigers are going to be aiming for on Thursday night.
Yeah, I heard a few experts calling for Coruscant to move out of dummy half and into the halves. I think that plays in the Dragons' hands. I think Dragons fans would be happy with that. Simply for the fact that the Dragons' middles have to be very wary of Oi Tukumanu and Klemmer when they're working together in that middle section of the field. Particularly now, Klemmer's developed a really good offload. And Oi Tukumanu, the way that he's such a big body, he can stand, and he's willing to give that pass too. If Coruscant wasn't playing, I wouldn't be talking about Oi Tukumanu and Klemmer, just because of that combination. And if they do get a little bit of time in the middle, then Coruscant can create off a whim and do something. You mentioned Papali'i and Bateman. They are both working really, really hard for the club. I know a few people are saying that Papali's been a disappointment from coming over from Parramatta. I don't see it that way. He's had to play a different way and really toiled hard. He runs some really hard lines. He puts his body on the line defensively and runs a really good line. But then you look at Bateman and he's so awkward and weird with the football. He's not a big body, but he's so tough and he can dig into the line. He can play before the line and he can crab across field and he's got an awkward offload. And there's just things that he does on a field which the modern player sometimes isn't expecting. And that's sometimes the most dangerous player on the field. So if West Tigers can punch holes through the middle of the field for the Dragons, then that does open up the field for those other guys too. So, but then at the end of the day, we're still talking about the West Tigers looking down the barrel of another wooden spoon. So, I'm not going to talk the West Tigers up too much up. And again, this just comes back to the very best each player can do when you look at the history of what they've done in the game so far. So if the Dragons play well, that negates a lot of that momentum that those West Tigers forwards can create.
In terms of the Dragons, if they're to have success on Thursday night, if they're to finally get a victory, especially in front of their home fans, who are maybe not one player to stop because it's wrong. It's wrong to think in the NRL you can just stop one player and you're going to win the game. But what do the Dragons have to do? Well, or who would be some of the players that would be on the tip sheet for the Dragons about, if not stopping, at least nullifying the impact?
Yeah. When West Tigers win games, and that is very few and far between, it tends to be a team performance, and there's several guys, 5 or 6, 7 players that play to their skins. And that's generally Stafford Toa out wide, a Tupou on the wing. On the other side of the field, Bateman, like I said, crabbing around, changing direction, dropping down second phase passes. Because of who West Tigers have playing in the halves at the moment, they are trying desperately to get Buller into the game, but it seems to be they're getting squeezed wider and wider and losing their shape. So when they are tipping the pass to Buller, Buller's not even square to the line. He's already running sideways waiting for the ball with those halves. And like I said, they're sliding further and further, wider and wider, where I just want to see Buller through the middle off Coruscant and guys like that. But if the Dragons can squeeze those halves further out, that eliminates the direct threat of Buller and they can pick him off. So if I was Buller, he's already had some big hits this year, but if I was the Dragons outside backs, I'd be saying, all right, yes, we've had some deficiencies this year, but we need to hunt together on both sides of the field and really jam in. And again, firstly, it's shutting down the big forwards in the middle and forcing Coruscant to pass rather than think run or create himself. And that in turn will force those halves to kind of, they just slide across field and the team goes with them. So if the Dragons can come against the grain and jam them up there and force some errors, there's some points there on the counter-attack and they can score very quickly against that. And we see with West Tigers that they seem to give up a lot of tries from further down the field when they've made an error with the ball. So I think the Dragons need to be on their toes. And yes, the West Tigers have got some dangerous play, but if you keep your shape and force Buller wider on the field, then that eliminates him from the game. And then you can counter-attack off that with forcing some errors. Even if and you've got to be willing to attack from further down the field because that's where you can get West Tigers. And that's when they pile on or give up points. It's 2, 3, 4 tries at a go.
At the beginning of the year, Kurt, I'm not sure if I even posed this question to you or asked you where you thought the Tigers or Dragons would finish up. But did you think these clubs would be 16th and 17th respectively at this stage of the season?
I went back and looked at my predictions. I wrote an article about it at the start of the year. I definitely had both sides outside the 8. Maybe I was being a bit biased, but I had West Tigers further up the table. But again, that was on the guys they'd signed. The fact that Benji was in there now coaching the team alongside Tim Sheens. I did have the Dragons down the table and purely because I believed, and it came true, is if Anthony Griffin was there, yes, we hoped and prayed that there was going to be signs of life and they would, change their spots, but they didn't, and there was no real change, so they kind of went into the season playing the same way. So, yeah, I'm glad they've made the change now, but a lot of people were calling for this, 10, 11, 12 months ago, but, here we are another year down the drain, but yeah, definitely both sides out the 8, but maybe hoping that both teams, were a little bit better than they were last year because there was another poor season for both clubs last year and it's repeating itself again this year.
I have no idea which way this one's going to go, Kurt. I feel like it's one of those games where you can kind of close your eyes and just point to one of the sides on the board and they might be the one that steals it. Can you see which way this is going to go, or is this going to be a tight game? Are we going to see one of these sides get blown out early and then a bit of a comeback like we saw the Dragons do against the Raiders? What are you thinking? What happens in regards to this game on Thursday night?
No idea. I just think we're going to see some weird stuff.
It'll probably be a full moon on Thursday night as well. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll have some those crazy dudes from Channel 9 talking about the windsock and blah blah blah. But I think the Dragons are kind of building, not towards a big back end of the season, but if they're going to win a couple of games, this has to be one of them. And I'll put it this way for the Dragons too, is I jumped on the NRL ladder predictor just before we went on to record tonight, and even if West Tigers won by a single point this week, and neither team wins another game this year, the Dragons would still finish ahead of West Tigers, and that is banking on Dragons not upsetting the Knights in the final round at Cogra. So, look, that's Dragons shouldn't be going out there thinking, well, this is not the end of the world, because this, you can't bank on other teams losing around you at the bottom end of the table, because someone tends to go on a little bit of run at the back end of the season. So I think for the Dragons, they just have to put their best foot forward and really win the game with their defence and hope that the West Tigers don't play the game of their lives, because they've done that a couple of times this year against some good opposition. I just can't see either side winning by a large margin. It might be a high-scoring game, but if you're a betting person, I'd be splitting up a couple of multis and going really hard on the Dragons in one and going hard on West Tigers the other, but both maybe 1-12, 1-10. Who knows?
Really intriguing to look at the run homes for the respective sides. For the Tigers, they're obviously up against the Dragons this week. They have the Rabbitohs at home in round 22. When I say at home, it's at Scully Park in Tamworth, so that takes away any home advantage there is. An interesting away game down in Canberra against the Raiders. Wouldn't be surprised if the Tigers did spring a potential upset there. Home against the Warriors a week after. They've also got a home match at CommBank Stadium against the Dolphins, away against the Roosters and away against Manly to finish the season. Whereas for the Dragons, they've got the Tigers this week, and then they've got Manly next week, and then they've got a barren run where they have, I think it's Parramatta, Souths, Melbourne, and the Warriors 4 weeks in a row, and then they'll finish their season off with a match against the Newcastle Knights at Kogarah. So the Dragons definitely have the more trickier run, so maybe that just adds a bit more spice, a bit more incentive for them to try and get the 2 competition points if there wasn't enough incentive already. Let's transition from that into our lower grade wrap before we almost get through everything and answer your fans' corner questions to finish off the podcast. And it was a good weekend for the Dragons in the lower grades in both Jersey Flegg and the New South Wales Cup. The boys were able to get up. The Dragons winning 36-16 against the Penrith Panthers, while it was a last-gasp win down there at Collegians just before New South Wales Cup kicked off. The Jersey Flegg side winning 26-20. They trailed 20 points to 16 with 5 minutes to go. They scored 2 tries, including one at the death from Nick Quinn, backing up a beautiful kick from Ben Rumble, who again found his way over the try line and got home by 26 points to 20. In the New South Wales Cup action, the Dragons big winners. Penrith were certainly without some of their top players. Some 5 of their top stars were pushed up to first grade with Ivan Cleary giving rest to some of the wounded State of Origin players or representatives for Penrith, but the Dragons still able to get the job done. So that means in the respective competitions and the knock-on effect New South Wales Cup, the Dragons are still 9th, but they have bridged the gap between the sides just above them. Now they're just a single point away from the Rabbitohs, the Panthers, and the Seagulls, who are all on 6th, and they're only 2 points away from the Raiders in 5th and the Warriors in 4th. So the Destiny's in their own hands. They take on a very good North Sydney Bears side this weekend. They've got a 5 o'clock kickoff out there at North Sydney Oval. The Bears currently first with a 12-6 record, and they have had in different form, I'd say, over the last 5 weeks. They've won 3 and lost 2, meanwhile the Dragons in a 6-week span have won 4 and lost 2, and have also won 7 of their last 10. So the Dragons sit 9 wins, a draw, 9 defeats. The advantage for the Dragons currently is that their for and against, or their points differential, is superior than a few sides above them. Certainly, the Magpies behind them on 18 and Newcastle 18, minus 119 and minus 129 respectively. Probably can't see either of those sides going on a run and winning, and their for and against would certainly work against them. But the Rabbitohs minus 49, the Panthers 38, and the Seagulls 43, all behind the Dragons, while the Raiders in 5th minus 13 also have a far less superior for and against or points differential than the Dragons. When you go up the ladder, there's obviously the Warriors 127, the Jets 139, the Bulldogs 154, and the Bears 105. But a couple of those big wins for the Dragons could hold them in good stead as they take on the North Sydney Bears this week. Meanwhile, if we jump across and take a look at the Jersey Flegg Cup, the under-21 competition, the Dragons have moved themselves up into 6th with 8 victories. They've won 8, lost 9. They've had 3 byes. It's all a bit farcical, the Jersey Flegg Cup competition, because every team by the end of the season is going to have had 4 byes in a 12-team competition. It just seems overkill. They've obviously done it for a particular reason, but it does seem like far too many byes for a side to be having during the season. The Dragons in 6th spot on 22. They've got the Rabbitohs 21, the Eels and the Seagulls on 20 just below them. Those sides all went down, which helped the Dragons this week. But they've got the Storm in 24 in 5th position and the Sharks in 26. The Panthers on 27 could potentially be chased down, but the top 2 sides, the Roosters 34 and the Bulldogs 32, they've all but guaranteed a top 2 finish in the semi-finals. We've been told that it is a top 6 semi-final race for both the Jersey Flegg Cup and the knock-on effect New South Wales Cup. But then we've also heard that it's top 5. So there's been no confirmation from the New South Wales Rugby League. So at the moment, we're believing that it is a top 6. And as that stands, the Dragons occupy the 6th and final playoff spot. And it gets a little bit tastier this week because the Dragons actually take on the 5th place Storm. The Dragons currently minus 42. The Storm currently minus 2. So if the Dragons could make up 40 differential points in this game, so for example, if they won by 20 or 21, they would draw themselves on level points with the Storm and also jump above them via points differential. That would get them into the top 5. So a very, very important game for respective sides this week. Let's just run through how the sides do line up as well, because obviously there's been a few changes in first grade that have affected the New South Wales Cup side, and they line up as follows for this match on Saturday evening. Trey Stewart at fullback, Alex Lobb is on one wing, Sione Finau the other. Savelia Tamale, who didn't play on Saturday, he's back in the centres alongside Max Fiernay. The 5'8", Paul Turner, he picked up some bruised ribs and the knee to the ribs when he played in first grade. He's back into the 5'8" position. That means Licken King Tonga drops out of the run-on side. Zach Herring is the halfback. A good game for him last week. Jaden Hunt and Zane Musgroves at props, so two guys that have spent a fair share of time in first grade. Conor Eisen is the hooker, while Nick Sagranis, Ryan Couchman and Alex Tuatavake locking the scrum. The bench, Harley Finau, Jacob Sherab, Nick Louis Torso and Hamish Stewart. In regards to Ryan Couchman, we've got some pretty reliable mail that the Dragons are going to be playing him on an edge for the rest of the season, and that's because they want him to play in that position next season. So looking like the second row position will be the position for Ryan Couchman moving forward, but not too many changes to the Dragons New South Wales Cup side as they get ready for a big match against the Bears. If they could win that on Saturday afternoon, that would be a huge tick towards the Dragons' hopes of playing finals footy. Meanwhile, on Saturday afternoon, the Dragons will take on the Storm down at Zeems Park in Corrimal, a 2 o'clock kickoff. If you want to be heading down and seeing the young Dragons there. Licken King Tonga, who played a New South Wales Cup, he's actually going to be playing in the Dragons jersey flake side, as is Ben Johnson, who also played in the New South Wales Cup last week. So Ben Rumble at fullback, T. Uramariki Heromia Takiri is on one wing. The other winger is Wesley Pring. Ben Johnson and Campbell Watchers in the centres. Licken King Tonga is the 5'8". Ashton Ward is the half. Bryce Magnone and Loco Pacific Tonga are the props. Declan Purcell hooker, Phoenix Vedanabu Affinity, Harry Rudd and Travis Barrett Hancock in the back row, with Kyan Hjalsen, Jet Liu, Callum Likevol and Tom Phillips rounding out the 17-man squad for the Dragons. So a couple of New South Wales Cup players dropping back, which will be a huge boost for the under-21s in a pretty big match for both the 21s and the reserve grade sides. And of course, we'll have full updates and reports on that over the course of the weekend. Let's take one last break here on episode 183 of the Red V podcast. On the other side of that, we're going to take a look at your fans' corner questions to conclude episode 183. Always love to get to this time of the podcast where we get to delve through the fans' questions that have been sent by all of our loyal listeners. And again, we thank the many people that sent in their questions this week. We've got some cracking questions, probably some of the best assortment of questions perhaps we've ever had here on the podcast. So excited to run through these with my co-host Curtis Woodward. Our first question comes from Ian Johnson on Facebook, and Ian has asked, should we grace Bud with an extended period of rehab on the sidelines to heal properly, including a trip to the American specialist who helped Turbo Tom, or should we let him go as he's a huge risk of repeating the injury every season? I'll let you handle this, Kurt, but I will just say I'm not letting Bud Sullivan go. I think he's a wonderful talent and he's certainly the future of the club, but maybe it's worth looking into some of the rehabbing things that other players have done. I think this has been 3 or 4 times that he's hurt his hamstring, whether that's him carrying a little bit too much weight and maybe in the off-season working under Andrew Gray and Dan Lawson and this new maybe fitness regime the Dragons bring in may help, but what are your opinions on it?
Yeah, no, good call in regards to not letting him go, simply because the Dragons have invested so much in him already. They are too far down the track to just give up and let him go. This season is gone. There's going to be huge pressure on Sullivan in 2024, no matter what. Doesn't matter what way you look at it. So if I was the Dragons, I would be going all in, supporting him, and if it does mean getting him over into the States and getting the specialists over there to take a look at him, then why not? You've gone this far with him. You might as well tick every box before you give up on a guy like Jayden Sullivan. Because if you do that, then another club comes in and potentially steals the thunder that he could outlay for the Dragons. So wouldn't be letting him go, and I'd definitely be trying to do everything you can to get his leg right. Is it both, or is it?
I think he's injured both of them. Yeah, at different times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'd be going slow with him, and it's not the worst idea to send him over to the States.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm happy to be chaperone and take him over there. And next question, Kurt, comes from Shannon Jarvis, and Shannon has asked, with the rumours of Edwin Apape making a possible move to the Dragons next season, could we see a two-hooker system with Little? How would you see it working out if Little is working towards being an 80-minute player? I can't see either player sitting in reserves as a backup in case of injuries with the opportunities and spark they create.
I might throw this back to you, Jack, because I don't know much about Edwin, but me...
No, neither do I, to be fair. I know the Dragons have been... seems like the Dragons are interested in chatting to him.
Yeah, look, Jacob Little's your guy. He proved himself from round one for the first game he played for the club, and I felt like it's been very, very slow and steady baby steps, respect-wise, maybe not from outside the club. It looks like Dragons fans are really bought into what Jacob Little's given to you guys this year, but maybe I think maybe some in the club is still a little bit untrusting of how long Little can keep his body together. So I don't know much about Edwin Apape, but a second option there, a quality second option, it might be good for Jacob Little in the next maybe 12 to 18 months, because as long as you're not losing anything when Jacob Little's off the field, that's the main thing. I just say when Little's off the field, you guys, you just go from, your attack goes from 2.5 stars to 1. So, if it helps him with more quality during the game, then by all means. But I don't know enough about the kid to potentially talk about him being a double act with Jacob Little next year.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Jacob Little is obviously only played 11 games last year, has only played 75 first-grade games in 7 seasons at the Tigers. He played 11 in 2022. He played 20 in 2021, but he only played 6 in 2020. And then the start of his career, he played 1, 13, 13, 11. So outside of that 2021 campaign where he played 20, and this season where he's currently played 15 games, I believe it is, he hasn't played more than 15 games in a season outside of those 2 seasons we spoke about. So maybe it's just managing his body. He's come back for some pretty significant injuries. Sometimes coming to the club and getting a chance to play between 40 and 50 minutes can suffice. But maybe next year Shane Flanagan wants him to play 80 minutes. I know that's what he did with Michael Ennis, and Michael Ennis was a very good player that didn't really take breaks very often, but maybe Shane Flanagan might be more tempted to kind of run with one hooker and have someone else on the bench that could relieve Jacob Little if there was an injury or if he was feeling fatigued. But Shane Flanagan certainly said he was looking for another hooker. So maybe Shannon, that interesting news about Edwin Apape is maybe not too far off the mark. We'll have to keep tabs on that one. Next question from Adam's a really good one. He said, "What is Jack Bird's role in the coming seasons? Can Shane Flanagan keep Jack Bird healthy and unlock his potential for the remainder of his contract? Does this involve him getting lighter and moving into perhaps a utility role?"
I'd go the other way. Let's jack him up as big as you can and put him in the front row. No, I don't know. He's a mystery box to me. I'm not even sure he's going to beat anything.
I think he needs to defend in the middle. I think the middle, I think it's a little bit too hard at his age and with the issues he's had with his knees and different things that have happened in the past, his rheumatoid arthritis, which he still battles day in, day out. I think it's a bit too much to expect him to be able to move so well laterally, because that was certainly the rhetoric, Kurt, when they moved him from the centres, because as you mentioned, when he came down, or you remember, when he came down from Brisbane, he played outside of a few games where he played fullback and 5'8" and filled in different positions. For 90% of that first season under Griffin, he was playing in the centres, but then they said they wanted to move him back into the pack because they felt that he was a bit of a liability defensively. But he's probably that in the back row position with some of the quick and big players you've got running at you. So I know de Belin is the 13, but I would even like to see Jack Bird perhaps come into that 13 role as well, whether you start him off the bench and maybe split it up where Jack de Belin plays 50 minutes and Jack Bird plays 30, and maybe you can kind of throw him onto the field and he can be just a roaming middle for another 10 or 15 minutes. If you want to get your money's worth out of him, you want him playing between 40 and 50 minutes a week. He can play a portion of filling in at 13 with Jack de Belin and maybe, as you mentioned, Kurt, kind of bulking up a little bit and just being a bit of a presence in the front row, coming off the bench when the opposition is tiring a little bit, and he can add a bit of forcefulness through the middle of the park.
Yeah, and look, while you were just chatting away there, Jack, I just sort of, the blueprint could be like a Victor Radley kind of role. Because Jack Bird, he does have that bit of crazy about him too. So he's not going to shirk away from the big boys in the middle. And, sometimes, he can be a bit chirpy and that, gets the team and himself in trouble sometimes, and he's got a bit of back chat in him. But you could do worse than, getting him in the gym, putting him on a different program and seeing how he does go, because he can run a hard line. He can run good lines, and he's obviously got, if he has to, he's got a little tip on from him and a bit of passing ability. Obviously, we've seen that in the past. So I'd go that way. And I agree with you. It's probably too far gone with the injuries he's had to expect him to simply lose some weight and then expect him to play the way he did at the Sharks. But it's a very good question.
Brad on Twitter has asked, do you think Lomax at fullback is a real possibility in 2024 going forward? If so, do we look to move Sloan on or try him on the wing possibly? I'm totally against the Zach Lomax fullback thing. Fans have been losing their mind because they saw him play fullback for 15 minutes. And I'm not sure if you want to go back and watch that game, Zach Lomax was absolutely gassed. So he would need a completely different training regime. He's mainly played in the outside backs throughout his junior career. I think it just completely resets the development of Zach Lomax. And then if we move Zach Lomax to fullback, okay, then you've actually created two further issues, because then you've got to find, well, what are we going to do with Tyrell Sloan? Are we just going to drop him to reserve grade? Are we going to play him on the wing? Tyrell Sloan's not a winger. They tried that at the end of last season. I think his frame's too slight for him to be a winger. He's never played in that position. He's played as fullback all throughout his junior days and his junior rep days. So that's one issue in itself. But then you've got to try and find another centre. So Moses Sully's on the other side, and he certainly hasn't been as productive this year as he was last season. So you've got a potential issue on one side of the field, and then you've got to try and find another centre. If they went out and signed, I don't know, Joseph Sawali or Joey Manu or something like that, then okay, yeah, maybe you do shift Zach Lomax to fullback. But I think muddling with Zach when he's been moved from the left side to the right side. He's now back in his regular position. We saw probably the best game he played in a couple of years. I think it's all just a little bit of paper talk, Kurt, and I certainly wouldn't be lining up to put Zach Lomax at fullback. I think there was a reason it was scrapped after one or two games back in 2020. I think his best position is at centre, and the combinations he's formed with Michaeli Ravalawa.
Yeah, agree. Simply for the fact that you said that he only got a couple of games there in 2020, which to me sounds like that wasn't really a long-term plan to start with, and it was just kind of, throwing darts at a board. The one thing, and it's not necessarily Lomax to fullback, I do like the concept of shifting Sloan, if it is part of a long-term plan to do make him a better fullback, is that maybe he can understand the NRL a little bit better from the wing if he does get a little bit bigger. He's on the slight side, but he is filling into his body. I think he can learn some fundamentals of the game from the wing, working with a top-class fullback under new coaching regimes, like with Flanagan coming in, with the goal that he becomes the long-term fullback, a little bit like Tuivasa-Sheck and Michello at the Roosters, and I think Suolai and Tedesco, I think, was the long-term plan there for the Roosters before he took the money. He'll be back at the Roosters, I'm sure, playing fullback at some point in the future. But, yeah, it's too many moving pieces to, fill a couple of spots on maybes to weaken other positions. So I think at this point, keep your guns in your holsters and wait till Flanagan gets in there and blows up the place before we start, switching players around, willy-nilly.
Our last question comes from Jason Dalton Earls, and Jason said, why are personalities dictating Musgrove not playing when we are so lacking a middle? With the season-ending injury to Sewer, will that change? Who is responsible for Musgrove not being picked? Because Ryan Carr said he does what's best for the team.
I'll leave that on you, Jack. We've touched on it a bit, but I'd only be speculating on stuff that you've said and kind of what Dragons people are saying.
And I think I'll be speculating as well, but I think my educated guess would be that perhaps Zane Musgrove's personality has kind of ruffled a few feathers. He had that interaction with, more than an interaction, scuffle with Michaele Ravalawa the night after or the night of the Charity Shield, where they were kind of getting on the piss a little bit and the boys got a bit aggro and then they obviously patched things up. But I think when you've just started a new club and you've been there for 3 months and you get in a fight with the lovable Fijian, then, yeah, that probably reflects poorly on the character of Zane Musgrove. We know all the off-field incidents he's had, and he's bounced from a couple of clubs. I tend to agree with you, Jace. Like, I think he's a big body. I think he's someone that can be a strong presence. I don't know if it's those things that I spoke about. I don't know whether he's not a very good trainer. I know some coaches, some old school coaches are really big on that. The way you train is the way you play, and they don't want someone that's half-assing it at training, and they won't get the call up. But as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I think with the injuries we've had, you would think that Zane Musgrove would at least be able to get 20 or 30 minutes off the bench. So, Jace, unfortunately, I can't answer it. I don't think there would be outside people necessarily having an influence on Musgrove not playing. I wouldn't think for a moment that it's the board or anyone like that influencing the decisions. I think it's probably just that Ryan Carr doesn't rate him, doesn't see him as part of the or one of the best 17 players at his disposal. And I guess that the loss of first grade not having him is a bonus for our reserve grade team. When you see the likes of him and Jaden Hunt lining up as starting props for the Dragons this weekend, that's a boost as they try and make their way to the finals. But apart from that, I guess I can't really add too much more. Kurt, have you got anything you want to add? It's a question that, just like when people ask us about the salary cap and what's the Dragons salary cap situation, we can speculate, but we really don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, if he's not getting a run at this time of the season, then obviously he's not in this coach's plans. So, it'll be interesting to see if he survives at the end of the year and wants to stay at the club. It might just get to the point where they're waiting for an offer to come through and he's part of some kind of trade deal, because there's some clubs looking for big boppers. So that it might be strategic more than anything that he's still at the club, because they might be able to use him in a trade moving into the back end of this year and into the off season.
That's our last question on our Fans Quarter segment this week. So big thanks to everyone that sent their questions in. But before we finish, we want to announce the Who Am I? We spoke about this player that made their debut in 2013 against the Gold Coast Titans in a 15-14 loss. He played fullback and 5'8" and played a total of 106 first grade games, scoring 45 tries. He made 29 appearances for the Dragons, but also had stints at St Helens in 2015 and also the Hull Kingston Rovers in 2017 to 2021. He also won the premiership with the Illawarra Cutters in 2016, where they beat Mounties in the grand final, and also was part of the side that won the State Cup the following week against the Burleigh Bears. Kurt, have you been able to put your thinking cap on? Any ideas of who you think the Who Am I is this week?
I Googled it.
Of course he did.
I had to. I had to do it. But no, he was a good little player, and a gutsy little guy, but probably not his fault. But if he was a little bit taller, that would have certainly helped him. But a good little squad member, and tried his guts out for the Dragons in 2 stints.
The Who Am I for this week is Adam Quinlan, the former fullback and 5'8". And currently, I actually got a chance to call Adam down there at Warilla on Sunday. He's still running around with the Nowra Bomaderry Jets, him and his brother, Kurt, I think it is, play first grade for Nowra Bomaderry. They're inside the top 4, so they're playing some pretty good footy, so maybe a chance to get some silverware late in his career. But a good little servant for the Dragons, had a bit of creativity, and has was able to carve out a decent career over in the UK and has come back and been a pretty good kind of lower tier, second tier type player that's played in some of those reserve grade competitions for many years as well. So we salute Adam Quinlan in the Who Am I this week on the Red V podcast. That brings us to the end of episode 183. Kurt, as always, thanks for your work on the podcast, mate, and it's going to be an interesting Thursday night for one of us.
Yeah, I hope it's a draw, mate. I hope it's a nice game and it's a draw, and both fans get to go out of the. No, what am I saying? Go to the West Tigers.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me if that did happen. Yeah, I'm sure Kurt would love a Tigers win on the weekend. But that's all we have time for here on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to bring you the Red V podcast once more, and we'll be back next week for a brand new show talking everything St. George Illawarra. But until then, hopefully talking about a Dragons victory next week on episode 183 of the Red V podcast. But on behalf of my co-colleague and co-podcaster Curtis Woodward, I've been Jack Clifton. Let's go those mighty Dragons.
Sports Social Podcast Network.